Good morning, everybody, and thank you for joining us in our session this morning. My name's Jenny Nelson. I'm the digital lead at Newcastle City Council, and I'm joined today by Professor Phil James and Dr. Luke Smith at Newcastle Urban Observatory. Guys, do you want to introduce yourselves quickly?
Hi, I'm Phil James. I'm a professor in engineering at Newcastle University, and I lead on the Newcastle Urban Observatory project.
And I'm Luke Smith. I'm a lecturer in data-centric civil engineering at Newcastle University, and I work with Phil on the Urban Observatory.
Great, and Phil is driving the slides for us today, so we all get the unenviable next slide, please. So next slide, please, Phil. In terms of the session today, first of all, just in terms of housekeeping, by all means, pop questions in the chat. Would be happy to pick those up at the end. But in terms of the session today, what we'll be covering are some of the real ways in which, as a city, we've responded to the COVID-19 challenge. And obviously, I guess initially, sort of back in March 2020, that was much more of a crisis response. But actually, as we moved over the year, we have been taking much more of a proactive approach to opening the city back up and giving people more confidence to go about their day-to-day lives. And I guess the common thread through what we've been doing is that we've been looking to do that in a smart way. So what we'll be covering today is intelligent data collection, how we've been using different tools and techniques to quickly access information about the city and how the city is reacting and responding. We'll also be saying a bit about how we've then taken some of that data and analysed that for good through our City Lifeline service. And we'll finish with a session on my favourite pet project of the year, which is howbusyistune.com. But I guess fundamentally how we're taking data and sharing that with people in the city. Next slide, please, Phil. But I guess before we get into the detail of the project and the actual responses, I really just wanted to say a little bit about what do we mean by a smart city response. And I think fundamentally what that means to me anyway is that we've done this in a way which is collaborative, which is driven by data, and which is focused on outcomes. So this isn't Newcastle's tech response to COVID-19. It's actually our smart city approach. And we're really fortunate in Newcastle to be able to work across the public sector, the private sector, voluntary sector, academic sector, really to bring the best of all of our assets across the city. So to use data, to use digital, to use innovation, to not only respond to COVID, and Craigie, wouldn't it be nice if next year we're not talking about COVID, but actually to work in a way that improves public services, that supports skills and jobs creation, that reduces digital exclusion, that ultimately makes things better for people who are working, living and visiting Newcastle. And I guess this is if you notice, this is our updated digital picture. This is actually the third one we've had done. And actually the way that I want to talk about this in particular is that we're not just focusing on the bottom. So if you look at the bottom of the picture, that's very much showing the data, the infrastructure, and Newcastle has stacks of that. It's brilliant infrastructure of many different types, lots of data collection as you'll hear. But it's not just about that. It's not just enough to collect the data. You then need to do something with it to have that end benefit for people, for businesses in service delivery, and also from an invest perspective as well. This is about actually selling Newcastle on not just the national but the global stage as well. Next slide, please, Phil. But obviously it is difficult to deliver the outcomes if you're not able to access the data to drive that evidence for change in the first place. And I'm sure we'll all be quite familiar that Newcastle is very privileged to host not only the National Innovation Centre for Data, but the Urban Observatory as well. And Phil, I'm just going to hand over to you now to say a bit about the Urban Observatory in particular and how you've been collecting data and using that to drive change over the last year.
Now the slides aren't working for me. Hold on. There we are. So thanks, Jenny. Yeah, I mean, many of you might be familiar with what we've been doing over the past 5 or 6 years at the university. But it's it's very much about this idea of how do we capture the heartbeat of the city through data, and really thinking about the scale at which we do that. So not one junction, not one street, not one sector, but across all of them, really trying to understand how all of these things fit together. And most of the examples you can see on here are fancy videos and things like that, but that's because grey boxes attached to lampposts measuring noise aren't very photogenic and not very exciting, but the data they create is. And we believe that by capturing this data across long time series, sort of a longitudinal baseline, we're actually able to see the impacts of things that we do in the city and generate evidence for change, and hopefully use this data for the public good. Oh, gone one too many. This isn't an exercise just in data collection for its own sake. This is in the sort of realization that you can't look at any of the problems, COVID included, that face our major urban centres, whether that's urban flooding like this. Many of you will recognise a bit of the quayside from, I can't remember, this is 2018, I can't remember exactly when this was, when we had a summer supercell. These sorts of problems, net zero, adaptation to climate change, air quality, are what we call wicked problems. They're really difficult to solve. There's no simple solution. And any solution means that somebody somewhere is going to pay. You can't all be winners from these solutions. And so you need to understand the impacts of your intervention, not just on, in this case, improving flood defence, but what impact does it have on traffic and people's ability to move around and those sorts of things. So trying to capture all of that holistically what's happening in the city in order to be able to address specific problems, understand how changes in one sector then ripple out across other sectors, and also ripple out spatially from the place where you intervene to other things. So what we've been doing in the observatory over the past 5 or 6 years, and the observatory is now not just us. It started us being us putting sensors out, and we spent a lot of money doing that. We spent over £4 million putting sensors out in and around Newcastle. But actually one of the great strengths is the partnerships that we've developed with the City Council, Newcastle and others, and many of the other people who collect data. In fact, over half our data that streams in now comes from sensors that aren't our own. And I think that's a real lesson about how we can operationalize and reuse existing information, bringing it all together to try and answer some of these really tricky, wicked problems. The observatory collects data across 4,000 plus data streams, agnostic against sensor platforms. We use a lot of CCTV analytics and machine learning to count things in and around the city. And that amounts to about 10,000 observations every minute of every day coming into the system. All of that's available in real time as open data. Anyone can go and have a look at any of those and reuse that data, hopefully providing this data for the public good. And because we had all this infrastructure in place, very early on, within a couple of days of the announcement of lockdown, we were able to stand up services to support, in this case, Jenny and her colleagues and others, about what was happening in the city right now across key metrics. So how were the policies being translated into traffic numbers, pedestrian footfall, car park occupancy, and all of that, and provide this sort of real-time dashboard. And that was only possible because we had the skills of people like Luke and others, but also because we had all that infrastructure in place. It was extraordinarily easy to repurpose this. And this data has been provided then to the DFT and direct to number 10 as a sort of an indicator of what's happening on the ground as decisions are made. It's quite small, but if you look at the bottom right-hand corner, this is some of our car park data. And it's a really good example of how data tells us a story. So the top one there is the one where our Nightingale Hospital was, and then it's been dismantled and now people are parking there. You can see some others at the city centre where you can see the impact of lockdown and then the opening on the car park occupancy. So you can get real insight into this data, particularly when you start thinking about how you compare it with what's happened in the past. So I'll pass back to Jenny now and tell us all about Wordnerds.
Yeah, because I think along with urban data and along with that, you know, the air quality, the real-time travel and traffic information, which is fascinating. Actually, along with that, wouldn't it also be nice to know what people in Newcastle are thinking and feeling? So we were really lucky to be working with a local SME who I'm sure many of you will be familiar with, Wordnerds. And we actually started working with Wordnerds pre-pandemic. But it's been fascinating over the last year to be able to work with them, to use their AI-based linguistic analysis tool to really sort of hear what people in Newcastle are saying. What are they saying? What are they feeling? Where are their pinch points? Where are the things that are going well? Where are the things that are not going so well? And certainly, from my perspective, I'm much more interested in uncovering some of those unknowns. So not specifically where people are tagging the city council, but actually what are people talking about that are some general trends, general themes where we may be able to intervene and we may be able to support. And so working with Wordnerds has helped us to really sort of cut through the noise of hundreds of thousands of data points on Twitter. To, like I say, to try and understand where there's pain points that aren't specifically for the council, but are where we can possibly intervene. And probably the best example of that is the noise that we've been picking up about cellular coverage and connectivity. So from I guess from an Ofcom perspective, from an official perspective, we didn't realise that there was an issue with connectivity, particularly mobile connectivity in Newcastle. And actually, through a number of picking that up through the Twitter analysis, people complaining about in areas where we not expect them to have any kind of issue. And actually, what we're able to do off the back of that. Cellular mapping surveys, so we actually get a supplier information on their version of the connectivity and the coverage. That people are having across our city. And obviously, as a result of that mapping, we'll potentially intervene and how we can potentially offer up some of our assets to help support that connectivity as well. And we're also doing some targeted follow-up work, listening for public health and for Active Newcastle to try and again understand where do people feel that there's still some issues, where can we intervene and where can we help out. Next slide, please, Phil. Actually, you've gone one slide too far, I think. Oh, it's vanished.
It's my fault. I think I've reordered it into my section.
No, okay. I'll let you off, Luke. Go for it.
Sorry, my fault. But I really liked how Jenny managed to, while talking about connectivity issues, have a few connectivity issues there. That was really well planned. So it's my job to take us back to a more depressing, sort of slightly more miserable time last year, of March 2020, when if you cast your mind back, the first lockdown had just begun, and a lot of people were living alone, unable to go to the shops, unable to socially interact, or perhaps were having to isolate because the rules had been changed and there was no alternative. And support bubbles weren't introduced until June 2020. And as a result, Phil, if you flick onto the next slide, both Jenny, the council, and the masses of voluntary and community organisations across town and Weir were having to sort of really work overtime to support those people. And this is a picture of some of the supplies that Newcastle had just before they delivered them out to people. And these were people that couldn't go to the shops, so they had no alternative really but to get an emergency supply. And you know, even bog roll was in short supply back then, I recall. Now the council didn't do all of this by themselves. There's this wealth of organisations, and I think if you flick to the next slide, Phil, this is the slide that I've moved. Sorry, Jenny. So is this the one? Working with the university and repurposing a tool that already existed, we were able to find out all of these organisations that were able to support and help in some way. Obviously, not all organisations do the same things, and many of them only cover certain areas. Essentially, you know, this was a sort of crowdsourcing exercise. What can you do to help? And people put their offers on this map and said, this is what we can do. And we were able to use that information to create something called the City Lifeline, that was a sort of single point of contact for support during COVID-19, particularly the early stages of it. And if you flick onto the next slide again, Phil. So all of those organizations that said they were able to support, all of those people that said they needed support, and that might have been online through a web form, might have been they contacted a call center, or it might have been through email or some other means. All of that went into one big system that we threw together in a hell of a hurry in just a couple of weeks, in order to start matching these things up and triaging them as well. So some people needed support today, some people needed food deliveries or prescriptions collecting, some people just wanted someone to talk to. So there was a real breadth of needs and demands at the time as well. And some people, rather than organizations, were also very willing to offer their own time and services to volunteer as well. So all of that data went into this system, and we tried to match people up as best we could, based on some sort of postcode matching algorithms and sort of prioritization, and also based on the capacity of the organizations that were able to help. And in total, I think about 4,000 residents were supported in some way through this system, which I think is great. And then if you flick onto the next slide, the other sort of aspect of all of this is all of these requests and all of this information about people's needs. There's the most immediate needs in terms of I need some food or whatever, but there's also, you know, I've lost my job, that kind of information in there as well. And it's a real sort of treasure trove of data to be analysed and used, not just in the immediate incident response, but also in the future planning, in some of the bids and some of the strategies that have gone into the public health response as well, and also in, you know, it's going to continue to be used, not just the data on the requests for support, but also the locations of the volunteers. And this heat map here, you know, sort of as you might expect, almost exactly reflects the index of multiple deprivation in Newcastle as well. The volunteers is a slightly different case. Actually, they were, you know, spread throughout the city. It's not just necessarily the people that had free time, almost all walks of life and all areas. You know, there was huge numbers of people, tens of thousands, I think, of people that were willing to help out. And yeah, I think we're in a better place now. So this system is sort of slowly winding down, and the next sort of stage in this story, Phil, if you flick to the next slide, was to then look at, well, as lockdowns end, how do we enable people to go back to the city in a safe way and feel safe. So as Phil sort of explained, you know, we're sat as a city on this enormous treasure trove of data, from sensors, IoT data, the CCTV analysis, and things like that. And that's useful information, actually. You know, people wanted to know where they could park their cars. They wanted to know how busy the shops were. Phil, if you go to the next slide. So this is some footfall data from Northumberland Street, and this is quite interesting as well. So this is not just one sensor that covers Northumberland Street, but a multitude of sensors on the road. And you could see, for example, when the one-way system was introduced, you could see differences in those on the left and the right of the road. So you can sort of measure compliance with that one-way system as well. You can see that on the east side near Fenwick, there's a bit of a spike, and that's because of some of the building work that's going on. So there are all sorts of obscure signals in this data that don't necessarily come to mind without digging into it. And if you flick to my final slide, Phil, what we were able to do is to sort of throw all of that data together and rapidly prototype this public-facing site that sort of simplified and distilled it all down into just a website that told people how busy the city is, both the car parks and Northumberland Street. And then I think, Jenny, are you going to pick that up with the next iteration, the better versions?
Yeah, but I guess just staying on it's probably worth saying that even though that was very much a prototype version, the user feedback was absolutely amazing. I mean, we were blown away by the positive response from people. So this was, as Luke said, a really sort of quick exercise in how can we take that Urban Observatory raw data and present it to people in a way that's perhaps a bit more user-friendly. It was something that was a collaboration between NE1, the National Innovation Centre, the Urban Observatory, the council. We were really keen to just put something out there. And to a certain extent, when I look at it now, I kind of cringe a little bit because I think it actually looks so big. It's a great example. Get something out there and then some feedback, and you can build. Thankfully, MHCLG, the government, felt the same way. They actually thought this is a fantastic example of a city working together and presenting information back to users. And we were able to access some of their COVID-19 digital fund to really, I guess, take it from what it was launched as and rediscover some of the user need, do some more user research, which we contracted Hedgehog Lab, local SME Hedgehog Lab, to do. So Phil, if you could skip on, please. And they really, I guess, went, as I say, back to the drawing board, I suppose, and sort of tried to unpick, well, we're presenting information on sort of footfall, and a bit about car parks, but actually, what is it that you want to see? How safe do you feel coming into the city centre? What else can we do? What would make you feel safer? What other information would you look for if you were planning a trip to the city centre? And it's fair to say, if you skip on, please, Bill, it's fair to say that busyness wasn't the only area of interest. So clearly, people were interested in how busy it is. But also they wanted information on what the safety measures meant, what safety measures had been put in place, and they wanted information on what shops and businesses were doing to ensure that they were COVID secure and promoting good COVID practice. And people also clearly, and I'll say a little bit more on this in a minute, but they wanted information on how they could travel safely as well. And that's something that nationally there's been a lot of messaging about, and people who still needed to use public transport wanted to know how they could do that safely. So we redeveloped, working with Hedgehog Lab, we very much redeveloped the site, very much taking a new style, language, colours around reassurance, and we launched a new site in time for toward the end of November, in time for the Christmas shopping rush. And Phil, if you could skip on, please. And we based it around those four different needs. So you see that there is still the how busy is homepage, but actually the main introduction to that, the main change was moving away from the colour-coded strip of Northumberland Street and actually moving towards more of a video-based approach, so that what we learned from the discovery, and I think this is something that's really sort of interesting when you look at other data sets as well, is actually, your perspective on something is very different to somebody else's, and that's certainly been the case with busyness. So where we might say something was busy, somebody else might think it was quiet. And I guess we went full circle from the analytics to actually we'll just show them, and they can make their own decisions on that. And the feedback that we had on the new site is suggesting that people want more videos. They really like the video. They like to be able to see that. We have that available in the city so that, they want to see that. And actually, just in terms of feedback as well, we're getting some really positive user feedback. So 90% usefulness of the site, over 50,000 hits, very much correlates with the changes in the lockdown and the roadmap. So, big spikes when the shops are reopened. But it is something that people still see a value in. We did cover some content, I guess more static content about the safety measures that were in place. Skip on, please, Phil. In terms of information about shops and restaurants, I think this was a really good example of not reinventing the wheel. So we knew that Google were already asking businesses to update on their business page the steps that they had taken to become COVID compliant. So we just provided the Google Maps API, we weren't going to provide that in a different way. So people can actually look for themselves, and that's the best way for the business to keep that information updated as well. And in terms of travel and mobility, we were able to provide the real-time information on car parks, and also, I guess at that point, more of a list of links to some of the other travel operators and some of the guidance on that. But I think even at the time, we absolutely recognised that there was probably more to do on that particular user need. And actually, MHCLG felt so too. And we were able, again, to do some more work on that and some more discovery and some more user needs analysis. And we continued to work with Hedgehog Lab on that. To understand, how do we support people to return perhaps to pre-pandemic transport choices? We know from the Urban Observatory data that as a result of people having a year of avoid public transport messaging, we know that people are returning to their cars in droves. We know that congestion levels are high. Actually, what more can we do to provide data? What more data can we give people to help them make different decisions? And also within that, how do we continue to try and encourage some of the really sustainable improvements in travel that people have made over the pandemic? I know certainly I've never walked so much in my life over the last year, and more people have been getting on their bikes. So how do we try and do that? And actually, it's been a real learning curve as a project, because what we found through, again, a lot of discovery is that there probably wasn't a killer user need. So with How Busy is Toon, we had a user need that that people wanted to know how busy it was so that they could make decisions about going back into the city. We had the data to show that. With travel and mobility, it was far more complex. And what we found was that there were already obviously lots of perhaps consumer-facing products out there at the moment. And clearly what we weren't going to get into doing was going head-to-head with Citymapper and Google Maps and trying to create our own version of that for Newcastle. So what we've actually got to, and I was kind of hesitant to show this because it is the very, very early design. It does look like it's been designed by my son. If we could skip on, please, Phil. But what we're trying to do is, again, learning lessons from How Busy is Toon. Actually, well, what have we got? What have we got that we can just present in a different way, bring it together, which actually then helps inform people like Citymapper and Google Maps. But it's actually a step forward. It's that iterative improvement. It's a step in the right direction. And again, we know that we already have video. We know people like videos from the Northumberland Street work. We already have the Northeast Traffic Cam network, so we can show that to people. And there is already real-time open data on bus services. We can present that. We already have real-time car parking data. We can present that. We are working with Nexus around how we improve the amount of real-time metro service data there is as well. And equally, within Newcastle, for example, we have the e-scooters. Actually, why don't we just have a sort of one-stop hub for real-time traffic and mobility information that's shown in a user-centered, user-designed way in a way that it isn't at the minute, which, as I say, is supportive of opening up more data. It's a next step towards, you know, if Google and Citymapper then suck some of this up and put it in, that's great, that's fine, that's ideal. And what we also want to do is continue, as I say, some of that nudge messaging around, you know, does the roads look busy? You can have a drink later, why don't you walk or cycle? Plan your route here. And we know that there's already a load of route planning apps that you can use. So again, we're not going to reinvent the wheel. And you know, find out where you can park your bike. So this is obviously a really sort of early version, and Hedgehog are working on some of the wireframes now, that will then put back out to user testing. And certainly, if anybody has any feedback, please don't hesitate to get in touch. So I think just to summarise where we are to close really before any questions, is that, as Phil said, you know, there's always going to be these wicked problems, and COVID-19 and responding and reacting to that has been the wicked problem of the last 18 months. But there's one thing consistent about wicked problems, and that's that they cut across organisational boundaries. So not one individual organisation can solve climate change or can solve COVID-19. It really does require that collaborative effort. And I'm often asked about, you know, what's smart about Newcastle, and I truly do think that it is that collaborative smart city approach that's driven by data that's helped us respond to this in the best possible way. Hopefully you found that interesting. If anybody's got any questions, now your time to pop them in the chat, or yeah, probably pop them in the chat would be the best way to go forward. Don't be shy.
Otherwise, we're going to start talking about how expensive Dorset holidays are.
Well, we'll give you a final 10 seconds to ask your question. But actually, Philip, I don't know if you could share the final slide. If people want to get in touch, our Twitter handles are on that slide. So myself is at Jenny NCC Digital. We've got Bill James at Geo Anorak, and Luke Smith at, well, Luke Smith, but spelled in a slightly odd way. So please get in touch. Give us a tweet if you want to stay involved in some of the work that we're doing. But otherwise, thank you very much for your time. Oh, blimey, we've got a last minute question. Question to all: are the communities handled the same? How does this engage with digitally less engaged? I'm wondering if you mean about some of the how busy is Toon work, possibly. I guess that is something that we've considered. So we do know that actually the ability to get online is okay within Newcastle. So we definitely felt that this wasn't something that would be excluding people. But that said, we did also consider, you know, whether we could almost show this information in different locations. So is there a means of sharing this in communities? Is it about sharing on large advertising screens? We didn't progress that on the basis that actually a lot of the large screens were already in the city centre. So actually at the point that you'd be sharing the information, people would already be there. But I think it's definitely something that, as we think about more broadly sharing data and releasing data, it is definitely something that we need to consider about how do you make sure that even if people can't access that themselves, you know, is there a way we can share that with them in a different way? Phil, do you want to?
Yeah, so yeah, the Urban Observatory programme stretches across 5 cities and 1 region. Sheffield, Manchester, Birmingham, Bristol, and Cranfield, which represents sort of the Oxford-Cambridge arc, and that area of development are all part of the observatory programme. And we're all adopting a shared approach to data management and data sharing, with the idea that you can make a query on our data and compare it with Sheffield's data very easily without having to navigate multiple systems and multiple different types of data. So that's the idea. The last question here is to develop self-driving cars. I think are a really interesting thing, because there's lots of these new potentially disruptive data things coming in, and many of them are siloed, and self-driving cars seems to be one of those. So whilst they collect lots of really interesting data, it's unclear at the moment about how that data then goes to people like us for research, and Jenny and others for operational things to build up that picture of the city. So I think that's a really interesting question about how do we get into some of these things that are probably siloed and probably going to be managed and run by the Fords, Nissans and Toyotas of the world.
We have got a couple of other questions actually that are in the Q&A tab. So Phil and Luke, really, the question is about a digital twin of the city. Has this been considered, and where are we with it?
Well, I'm happy to start. And well, it depends what you mean by a digital twin. The first, in order to my view on it is, in order to build a digital twin, you first need data to parameterize that twin. To actually start to twin something, you have to start with data, and I think Newcastle's well on the way with that. There are plans to push forward a digital twin of sorts around the city centre, around Newcastle as a test site, but that depends on whether we're successful with competitive funding bids that other people are competing for as well. I think we're in a very strong position because we have the data to parameterize digital twins. We have the cooperation, as Jenny said, across multiple stakeholders, which if you're trying to do something other than in a single sector is pretty vital. And ultimately as well, we have the mechanisms to validate anything a twin does. So because we have that very large footprint of data collection. So I think we're in a strong place to do it. Someone just needs to stump up 10 million of cash and we'll be on the way and world leaders.
You've got to get your in there, definitely. I guess a final question. Am I echoing Phil's microphone possibly? Excellent. So Charlie's question, what's the uptake of the system been like? I'm assuming you're referring to How Busy Is Toon. And how can we make sure as many people know about it as possible? Yeah, I mean, I think that applies to, so we've had over 50,000 hits on the How Busy Is Toon platform. And as I say, the user feedback's been fantastic. There's definitely some more we need to do about the longevity of that site, and actually that is something that we're looking at as part of this next phase of user research. So if we're sharing other data about the city, does that fit within the How Busy Is Toon branding? Is that a logical place for people to go, or is there a more sort of natural way that we can share that with people? Certainly, we've been using a number of communications channels in terms of Newcastle Comms and University Comms and NE1 Comms to try and push the platform. Again, I think that's all part of the longer term around what we do with it. But we're also keen for other people to consider, you know, how does this fit with what they're trying to do in the city? So, you know, how do people like the Newcastle Gateshead initiative, how do they play a role in using this type of data to drive up the visitor economy? So it is very much about, is this a bit of a catalyst for how we use data in the city and presenting that back to citizens in a user-centric way. But it's really there for others within the city to take as well. And I think we're out of time now, so we will have to leave it there. Thank you again for joining with us. And as Amy said, everybody's now got a 15-minute comfort break. Please head to the expo and the networking pages and enjoy the rest of the session. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.